Diane collapsed at a charity gala and woke up with shocking news, pregnant with triplets after 15 years of trying. The miracle came with a death sentence. Her failing heart had 6 months. The babies needed 8. But dying wasn't Diane's biggest problem. Her billionaire husband was cheating with a woman who'd done this before. A professional, who'd left 3 wealthy men dead or broke. And now she was waiting for Diane to die so she could take everything. Smash that like button if you're ready for the ultimate revenge story. Comment what you'd do. And subscribe so you don't miss how this ends. What that mistress didn't know, Diane had a plan. The champagne glass shattered a full second before Diane Fletcher hit the marble floor. The sound echoed through the Manhattan penthouse ballroom, crystal exploding into 1,000 glittering pieces. Then came the heavy thud of her body. Then the screaming. Diane had felt it coming, the way the room tilted sideways. The way the chandeliers above her started spinning like carnival lights. The way her heart stuttered once, twice, then seemed to forget how to beat it all. Her last thought before the darkness. This is it. This is how I die. At a charity gala in a $5,000 gown, surrounded by people who will cry at my funeral but cannot remember my middle name. When she opened her eyes, she was on a gurney. Paramedics shouted numbers that meant nothing to her. An oxygen mask pressed tight against her face. The ballroom's ceiling tiles rushed past above her. Someone was holding her hand. Diane, Diane, can you hear me? Brett, her husband. His face swam into focus above her. Handsome, concerned. His tie was loosened. His phone was in his other hand. I'm here, she tried to say, but the mask muffled everything. Don't talk, he said. Just breathe. We're getting you to the hospital. The ambulance ride was a blur of sirens and sharp turns. Diane stared at the ceiling, counted the rivets in the metal, tried not to think about the way her heart was still beating wrong, like it was forgetting the rhythm. At Manhattan General, they wheeled her straight to the emergency room. Bright lights, cold air, nurses moving fast around her. Someone cut off her gown. She wanted to protest. $5,000, gone just like that. Dr. Audrey Klein appeared beside her. Diane had known Audrey for 15 years. They had been roommates at Columbia. Audrey had held her hand through every failed fertility treatment, every negative pregnancy test, every conversation about accepting that children were not meant to be. Diane, Audrey said softly, I'm here. You're going to be okay. What happened? Diane managed to ask. Your heart. It's the valve issue we've been monitoring, but we need to run some tests. They took her blood. They hooked her up to machines that beeped in different pitches. They wheeled in an ultrasound machine. Diane watched it all happen like she was outside her own body, like this was happening to someone else. Brett stood in the corner, still holding his phone, still checking it every few seconds. Diane noticed. She always noticed. Audrey squirted cold gel on her abdomen. Diane flinched. The wand pressed against her skin. Audrey stared at the screen. Her expression changed. Confusion, then shock, then something that looked like fear. Diane, Audrey said slowly, when was your last period? I don't know. 2 months ago, maybe 3. My cycle has always been irregular. You know that? Audrey moved the wand, pressed harder, stared at the screen with that same shocked expression. What? Diane asked. What is it? Audrey turned the screen toward her. Diane, you're pregnant. The room went silent. Even the machine seemed to stop beeping. That's not possible, Diane said. You told me 5 years ago after the last treatment failed. You said my eggs were not viable. You said between the endometriosis and the heart condition, I would never conceive naturally. I know what I said, Audrey replied quietly. But Diane, you're pregnant. About 12 weeks. Diane stared at the screen, at the small blob that did not look like anything, at the flickering white light in the center. A heartbeat. There's more, Audrey said. Her voice was strange, tight. More, Audrey moved the wand again. You're not carrying 1 baby. Diane, you're carrying 3. The world tilted again, worse than before. Triplets, Diane whispered. Triplets, Audrey confirmed. Brett stepped forward. Wait, what? How is that even possible? I don't know, Audrey said. But it's happening. Diane could not stop staring at the screen. 3 separate acts, 3 all separate heartbeats, 3 impossible miracles. This is amazing, Brett said. He was smiling, actually smiling. Diane, we're having babies. 3 babies. After all this time. Audrey was not smiling. She turned off the ultrasound, pulled a chair close to Diane's bed, took her hand. Diane, I need you to listen to me very carefully. The way she said it made Diane's blood run cold. Your heart condition, the valve stenosis, it's been manageable because of how carefully we've monitored it, but pregnancy puts enormous strain on the heart. Triplet pregnancy. Audrey paused. Diane, your heart won't be able to handle it. What do you mean? I mean carrying 3 babies to term could kill you. The room went silent again. This time it stayed silent. How long? Diane asked. I don't know. 6 months. Maybe less. The babies need at least 7 to 8 months in utero to have a good chance of survival. Your heart might not last that long. Diane looked at Brett. He had gone pale. The phone in his hand buzzed. He glanced at it, just for a second, but she saw it. So what are you saying? Diane asked. That I have to choose between my life and theirs. I'm saying we need to talk about options, about what this means, about what you want to do. I want my babies, Diane said. The words came out hard. Certain. I've wanted them for 15 years. I'm not giving up now. Diane, no. I know what you're going to say, that it's too dangerous, that I need to think about myself, but I've thought about nothing but myself for 15 years. Every treatment, every procedure, every negative test, it's always been about me, about what I wanted, about my body failing me. She pressed her hand to her stomach, to the place where 3 impossible lives were growing. For once, it's not about me anymore. It's about them. Audrey squeezed her hand. Okay. Then we fight. We monitor you constantly. We do everything we can to keep you and the babies healthy for as long as possible. Thank you, Diane whispered. Brett's phone buzzed again. This time he answered it. I have to take this, he said. He stepped out into the hallway. Audrey watched him go. Her expression was unreadable. He's under a lot of stress, Diane said. Work has been intense. I'm sure, Audrey said, but she did not sound sure at all. They admitted Diane overnight for observation, gave her a private room, hooked her up to more machines. The baby's heartbeats filled the room. 3 distinct rhythms, slightly out of sync with each other, creating a sound like rain on a tin roof. Diane lay in the dark and listened, pressed both hands to her stomach, tried to feel them, tried to believe they were real. This was everything she had ever wanted, the one thing that had always been just out of reach. And now it was here, inside her. 3 tiny miracles performing their own tiny magic. And it was going to kill her. The door opened. Ruth Fletcher, Diane's mother, rushed in, still wearing her pajamas. She had driven 3 hours from Connecticut the moment Diane called. Baby girl, Ruth said. She wrapped Diane in a hug that smelled like lavender and home. Tell me everything, Diane told her, about the pregnancy, about the triplets, about the death sentence disguised as a miracle. Ruth cried, then stopped crying, then took Diane's face in both hands. You listen to me. You're stronger than you think. You're my daughter. And Fletcher women don't quit. I'm scared, Mom. Good. Fear means you're paying attention. But don't let it make your decisions for you. Brett came back an hour later. He had been on the phone the entire time. Sorry, he said. Crisis at work. You know how it is. Diane knew. She had always known. Work came first. It always had. He kissed her forehead, told her to get some rest. Left before visiting hours ended. Ruth watched him go. How long has he been like this? Like what? Distant, distracted, gone. Even when he's here. He's busy, Mom. Running a company worth $3 billion is not easy. Neither is being married to you. And yet you make it look effortless. Diane did not have an answer for that. She fell asleep to the sound of 3 heartbeats, dreamed of faces she would never see, of birthday parties she would never throw, of graduations she would never attend. When she woke, the sun was streaming through the window. Audrey was back. She had printouts of the ultrasound, 3 blurry images, 3 tiny beings that would become people. I made copies, Audrey said, for your records. for whatever you want to do with them. Diane stared at the images, at the proof that miracles still happened, even to people who were dying. Audrey, tell me the truth. How long do I really have? Audrey sat on the edge of the bed. If we're lucky, 6 months, maybe you'll make it to 30 weeks gestation. Maybe the babies will survive at that point. Maybe you will too. And if we're not lucky, then we lose you both. Diane nodded slowly. Then I guess we better make these 6 months count. She looked at the ultrasound images again, at her 3 impossible children, at the only legacy she would ever leave behind. Audrey, I need you to promise me something. Anything. If it comes down to choosing between me and them, choose them. Every time, no matter what. Diane. Promise me. Audrey's eye filled with tears. I promise. Diane pressed the images to her chest, felt her damaged heart beat against them, felt the 3 smaller hearts beating inside her. Then let's do this, she said. Let's bring them home. That night, after Ruth left to get clothes from Diane's apartment, after the nurses did their rounds, Diane went to the bathroom. She heard Brett's voice in the hallway. Low, urgent. She cracked the door open. Brett stood with his back to her, phone pressed to his ear. I know, he said. Just a few more months. She's not going to make it anyway. Then we can finally be together. Diane's world shattered. She stood there, frozen. One hand on the door, one hand on her stomach. Brett laughed. I miss you too. Tomorrow night, same place. I'll text you. He hung up, turned around, saw Diane standing in the bathroom doorway. Hey, he said. You okay? Who was that? Her voice was steady, calm, dead. Just work. Investor call. You know how it is. He kissed her forehead again. Get some sleep. Big day tomorrow. They're discharging you. He left. Diane went back to bed, stared at the ceiling, listened to 3 heartbeats. Her phone was on the bedside table. She picked it up, texted Holly Brennan, her best friend since law school. I need you. Tomorrow. Come to my place. It's important. Holly responded immediately. On my way. Are you okay? No. But I will be? Diane put the phone down, pressed both hands to her stomach. I'll protect you, she whispered to 3 babies who could not hear her yet. From everyone, even from your own father. She closed her eyes. The heartbeats filled the room, and Diane Fletcher began to plan. Holly Brennan arrived at Diane's apartment the next morning with coffee, bagels, and the sharp eyes of a divorce attorney who had seen everything. She took one look at Diane and knew. Who is she? Diane handed her the phone, showed her the call log from last night. Brett's voicemail from 2 weeks ago that Diane had never deleted. Hey, babe, running late. Tell the guys I'll be there in 20. Babe, Holly said flatly. He called someone babe on a message he thought was private. There's more. Diane pulled out a receipt from Brett's jacket pocket. Pine Valley Country Club. Sunday brunch. $140. 2 entrees. You weren't with him Sunday, Holly said. He said he was at the office. Investor meetings. Holly's jaw tightened. She pulled out her phone. Made a call. Frank, it's Holly. I need you. Today. Full surveillance package. She paused. Cheating husband. Tech billionaire. Yeah, that Brett Caldwell. Another pause. Money is not an object. I want everything. She hung up, looked at Diane. Frank Kovac, best private investigator in New York. Ex-NYPD, handles all my divorce cases. If Brett is cheating, Frank will find proof within 48 hours. I'm pregnant with triplets, Diane said quietly. I'm dying. I don't have time for a divorce. Then what do you want? I want to protect my children. Holly sat down, took Diane's hand. Tell me everything. Diane did. The heart condition, the 6-month prognosis, the babies who needed 8 months, the choice she had already made. I'm going to die, Holly. Probably before they're born, maybe during delivery. But if I survive that, I won't survive much longer after. Diane, let me finish. If I die, Brett inherits everything. $3.2 billion, and he'll give it to whoever he's been calling babe in the middle of the night. Holly's expression hardened. Not if we build a fortress first. That's what I need you for. I'm a divorce attorney, not an estate planner. But you know every trick, every loophole, every way a spouse can protect assets. Holly was quiet for a long moment. Then she nodded. I know someone, Preston Hall, best estate attorney in New York. He's expensive, he's ruthless, and he owes me a favor. Set up a meeting. What about Brett? When do you confront him? I don't. What? If I confront him now, he'll be on guard. He'll hire his own attorneys. He'll fight me. And I don't have time or strength for that fight. Diane pressed her hand to her stomach, felt the small swell that was just beginning to show. I'm going to let him think I'm the sweet, dying wife who doesn't suspect a thing. And while he's planning his future with her, I'm going to build a legal fortress that locks him out of everything. Holly stared at her. That's brilliant and kind of terrifying. I learned from the best. Your mom, my mom. Frank's report came back in 36 hours. Holly brought it to Diane's apartment in a manila envelope. Ruth was there too. She had moved in the day after Diane came home from the hospital. Holly spread photos across the dining table. Brett and a woman, young, mid-20s, blonde, beautiful in that carefully calculated way. Designer clothes, perfect makeup, leaving Brett's office building together, her hand on his arm, at a restaurant, leaning close, laughing, in a parking garage, his hand on her lower back, kissing, no ambiguity, no deniability, just kissing. Ruth made a sound like she had been punched. Diane felt nothing. She had known, but knowing and seeing were different things. Who is she? Diane asked. Holly flipped to the background report. Sienna Vale, 27 years old, started as Brett's executive assistant 18 months ago, promoted to director of strategic initiatives 6 months later. 18 months, Diane repeated. That's before my last IVF cycle. It gets worse. Holly pulled out more documents. Frank dug deeper. Her real name is Sienna Voss. Changed it legally 6 years ago. Why would she change her name? Because Sienna Voss has a history. Holly laid out 3 more files. 3 previous relationships with wealthy men, Richard Grayson, Thomas Hartley, David Morehouse. What happened to them? Grayson died. Heart attack at 52. Sienna was his girlfriend for 8 months. She was the beneficiary on a life insurance policy. $500,000. Ruth's face went pale. Hartley died too. Accidental drowning at 58. Sienna was the only witness. She inherited his beach, house, and boat. Another $300,000. And Morehouse, divorced, messy. He lost $12 million in the settlement. Sienna claimed common law marriage. Diane stared at the photos. At this woman who had done this before, who knew exactly what she was doing. She's a professional, Diane said quietly. Yes, Holly agreed. Frank says she targets wealthy men going through vulnerable moments. Gets close, positions herself, then waits. Waits for what? For an opportunity, a death, a divorce, a moment when she can collect. Ruth stood up, walked to the window, stared out at the Manhattan skyline. She's waiting for you to Ruth said. Her voice was cold, flat. And then she's going to take everything. Diane looked at the photos again, at Sienna's smile, at the way she touched Brett's arm, at the calculation in her eyes. Not if I take it first. Preston Hall's office overlooks Central Park, floor-to-ceiling windows. Mahogany desk, diplomas from Yale and Harvard on the walls. Preston was 58, silver hair, sharp suit, sharper mind. He had handled Ruth's estate planning 15 years ago when Diane's father died. He looked at Diane across his desk, at the ultrasound photos she had brought, at the medical reports from Audrey. You want to protect your children's inheritance, Preston said. Make sure your husband cannot give it to his mistress. Yes. And you want to do this without him knowing, until it's too late to fight it. Preston leaned back in his chair. Tell me about your assets. Brett's company, Caldwell Technologies, is valued at $3.2 billion. He owns 68%. I own 2% from early stock options. We have the penthouse in Manhattan, worth $8 million, vacation home in the Hamptons, worth $4 million, various investment accounts, about $20 million combined, all community property. We married in New York. Everything acquired during the marriage is joint. Good. That gives us leverage. Preston pulled out a legal pad, started making notes. Here's what we're going to do. We create an irrevocable trust. The triplets become the primary beneficiaries. All assets transfer to the trust. Can we do that without Brett's signature? For your share, yes. For his share, we need him to sign, but we make it look like standard estate planning. Every wealthy couple does this when children are born. It won't raise red flags. What about guardianship? We include a clause. If Brett remarries within 5 years of your death, or if he cohabitates with anyone not approved by the Board of Trustees, guardianship transfers to your mother immediately and automatically. Ruth's eyes widened. He can't contest that. Not if he signs it, which he will. If we present it as protecting the children from estate taxes and outside claims. Diane felt something loosen in her chest. Hope, small, fragile. But there. What does Brett get? CEO salary. I recommend $200,000 annually. Comfortable, but not billionaire level. Enough that he can't claim financial hardship. Not enough to fund a mistress. He'll never agree to that. He won't read it carefully enough to notice. Most people don't. They trust their attorneys to handle details. Preston leaned forward. Diane, Tosh, I need to ask you something. Are you absolutely certain these babies are Brett's? Diane stopped. I've never been with anyone else. That's not what I asked. In trust litigation, especially with this much money, DNA proof is essential. Can you get prenatal paternity testing? Diane looked at Ruth, then back at Preston. Yes, Audrey can do it at my 20-week ultrasound. Non-invasive, no risk to the babies. Do it. Document everything. Because when Brett realizes what you've done, he will fight. And we need evidence that eliminates any doubt. Diane nodded. One more thing, Preston said. We need independent trustees. People Brett can't influence or bribe. I recommend 5. Your mother, your friend Holly, your doctor, Audrey, and 2 financial experts I trust. They'll control all investment decisions. Brett will have 0 access to principal. How long will this take? 2 weeks to draft documents. Then we wait for your signature. And Brett's. How do I get him to sign? Preston smiled. It was not a nice smile. You make him dinner. You tell him it's standard estate planning now that babies are coming. You hand him the papers while he's distracted. And you watch him sign away his fortune without reading a word. That night, Diane could not sleep. She sat in the nursery they were preparing. 3 cribs, 3 changing tables, 3 of everything. Ruth found her there at 2 in the morning. You're going to be okay, Ruth said. I'm manipulating my husband, stealing his fortune, becoming someone I don't recognize. You're protecting your children. There's a difference. Is there? Ruth sat beside her. When your father was dying, he made me promise something. He said, Ruthie, if I don't make it, you do whatever it takes to keep Diane safe. Not what's fair. Not what's right. Whatever it takes. I didn't understand then. I do now. What did you do? I lied to insurance companies. I forged his signature on forms. I did things that could have sent me to jail because keeping you alive mattered more than my conscience. Ruth took Diane's hand. You're doing the same thing, Shoam, for them. And 20 years from now, when those babies are adults, they'll understand. They'll know their mother fought like hell to protect them. Diane looked at the 3 cribs, at the future she was building for children she might never know. I hope you're right. I'm always right. I'm your mother. The 20-week ultrasound confirmed what Diane already knew. 3 healthy babies, 3 strong heartbeats, all developing perfectly. Audrey ran the DNA test during the same appointment, drew blood from Diane, extracted fetal cells, sent them to the lab with instructions to rush processing. Brett was there for the ultrasound, held Diane's hand, smiled at the screen. Do you want to know the genders? Audrey asked. Yes, Brett said. No, Diane said quickly. I'm behind there wiggling. I want to be surprised. Brett looked at her, shrugged. Your call. The DNA results came back 3 days later, 99.9% probability. Brett Caldwell was the father. All 3 babies. No doubt, no question. Diane filed the results with Preston, added them to the growing stack of documents that would protect her children. Now came the hard part. Getting Brett to sign. Diane spent 2 days preparing. She cooked his favorite meal, roast chicken with garlic mashed potatoes, fresh bread, the meal that reminded him of his childhood, when his mother was still alive, before the money, before everything got complicated. Brett came home at 7, surprised by the effort, pleased even. "This is nice," he said. "What's the occasion?" "No occasion, just wanted to do something normal before everything gets harder." They ate together. Ruth joined them, kept the conversation light, asked about work, about the company, about anything except the obvious. After dinner, Diane brought out the documents, set them on the table like they were nothing important. "Preston sent these over," she said casually. "Estate planning stuff. He says we need to update everything now that we're having the babies." Brett barely glanced at them. "What are they?" "Boring legal stuff. Trust for the children, making sure they're protected if anything happens to either of us." "Makes sense. Where do I sign?" Diane showed him, page after page. He signed without reading, barely paying attention, thinking about something else. Someone else. His phone buzzed. He glanced at it, smiled slightly, then caught himself. "Work?" Diane asked innocently. "Yeah, always something." He finished signing, pushed the papers back to her, kissed her forehead. "I have some calls to make," he said. "I'll be in the study." The moment he left, Ruth exhaled. He didn't read any of it. "He never does," Diane said. "That's what executive summaries are for. He trusts other people to handle details. And now those details have locked him out of his own fortune. Not his fortune, our children's fortune. There's a difference." Diane gathered the documents, put them in her bag, would drop them at Preston's office tomorrow morning. For notarization, for filing, for making permanent, phase 1 complete. But there was more to do, so much more. Over the next 2 weeks, Diane's pregnancy became harder. She was 24 weeks now. The babies were growing. Her body was straining. Her feet swelled so badly she could not wear shoes. Her back ached constantly. Her heart skipped beats at random times, made her dizzy, made her scared. Audrey ordered modified bed rest. Nothing strenuous, lots of water. Monitor blood pressure 3 times a day. Ruth took over everything. Cooking, cleaning, managing Diane's medications, timing her rest periods, being the mother and the nurse at the same time. Brett worked longer hours, came home later. Sometimes did not come home at all, crashing at the office. He would text, "Big project, deadline, love you." Diane knew where he really was, knew who he was with, did not bother confronting him. What was the point instead? She focused on her videos. She started recording them at 26 weeks, when the babies were big enough to probably survive if something went wrong, when death felt close enough to touch. She set up her phone in the nursery, sat in the rocking chair Ruth had bought, and talked to 3 children who could not hear her yet. "Hi, babies. I'm your mom. Today you're 6 months old. Well, 6 months in utero, which is different, but still, you're here. And I'm here. Aw, and we're going to meet soon." She paused, wiped her eyes, kept going. "I'm making these videos because I might not be here for everything. For your first steps, your first words, your first day of school, and I need you to know who I was, who you came from." She told them about her life, about meeting their father, about falling in love, about wanting them so badly it hurt. She did not mention the affair, did not mention Sienna. Those were conversations for later, for when they were old enough to understand. She made videos for every milestone. First birthdays, 5th birthdays, 10th, graduation, wedding days. "I hope you find someone who loves you the way you deserve to be loved," she said in the wedding video. "Someone who shows up, who stays, who chooses you every single day. Don't settle for less than that. You are worth more." Late at night, when she could not sleep, she would play the videos back, watch herself talking to 3 babies who might never remember her, might only know her through these recordings. It was the saddest thing she had ever done, and the most important. The 20-week ultrasound confirmed what Diane already knew. 3 healthy babies, 3 strong heartbeats, all developing perfectly. Audrey ran the DNA test during the same appointment. drew blood from Diane, extracted fetal cells, sent them to the lab with instructions to rush processing. Brett was there for the ultrasound, held Diane's hand up, smiled at the screen. "Look at them, Mo," he said. His voice was soft, almost tender. "They're perfect." Diane watched his face, tried to remember when he had looked at her like that, when she had been enough, when she had mattered more than his phone. "Do you want to know the genders?" Audrey's asked. "Yes," Brett said immediately. "No," Diane said quickly. "I want to be surprised." Brett looked at her. Confusion flickered across his face. "Really, you don't want to know? I've waited 15 years for this. I can wait a few more months for a surprise." He shrugged. "Your call." But Diane saw the flash of annoyance. He wanted to know. Probably so he could tell Sienna, so they could plan together, shop together, build a future that didn't include Diane. The thought should have hurt, but Diane felt nothing. Just cold calculation. Just the chess game playing out in her mind. After the appointment, Brett kissed her forehead. "I have to get back to the office, a big presentation this afternoon." On Saturday, Diane asked, "Investors don't take weekends off." He was already checking his phone. Already gone even while standing right there. "Will you be home for dinner?" "Probably not. Don't wait up." He left. Diane watched him go. Audrey watched too. "How are you really doing?" Audrey asked when they were alone. "I'm dying. My husband is cheating. I'm carrying 3 babies who might not survive. How do you think I'm doing?" Diane: "I'm fine." Audrey: "Really, I've made my peace with it." But she hadn't. Not really. Some nights she lay awake and imagined confronting him, screaming, throwing things, demanding answers. Other nights she imagined just disappearing, taking the babies when they were born and vanishing, starting it over somewhere he'd never find them. But both options required time she didn't have, energy she couldn't spare. So instead, she planned. The DNA results came back 3 days later. 99.9% probability. Brett Caldwell was the father, all 3 babies. No doubt, no question. Diane filed the results with Preston, added them to the growing stack of documents that would protect her children. "This is good," Preston said when she delivered them to his office. "This eliminates any challenge Brett might make about paternity." "He won't challenge it. He doesn't know enough to challenge it." "Never underestimate a desperate man with expensive lawyers. Then we make sure he's never desperate enough to hire them." Preston smiled. It was not a warm smile. "You're getting good at this." "At what? Thinking like a strategist. Most people let emotion drive their decisions. You're thinking 3 moves ahead. I don't have the luxury of emotion. I have 6 months, maybe less. I need to use every second." Now came the hard part, getting Brett to sign. Diane spent 2 days preparing. She researched his favorite childhood meals, called his father's old housekeeper, who still had the family recipes, learned that Sunday dinners had been sacred in the Caldwell house, that Brett's mother had made roast chicken with garlic mashed potatoes every week, that it was the last meal she made before the cancer took her. Diane had never made it for him, had never known it mattered. But she knew now. She shopped carefully. Organic chicken from the butcher Brett's mother had used, heirloom garlic from the farmer's market, Yukon Gold potatoes, fresh rosemary, real butter. Ruth helped her cook, watched her move slowly around the kitchen. Already exhausted, already struggling. "You should be resting," Ruth said. "I'm fine." "You're not fine. You're 6 months pregnant with triplets and your heart is failing. Which is why I need to do this now, while I still can." The chicken roasted for 2 hours. The smell filled the apartment. Rich, comforting, the smell of memory and home and everything Brett had lost when his mother died. Diane set the table, used the good china, lit candles, made everything perfect. Brett came home at 7, surprised by the effort, pleased even. "What's all this?" he asked. "Your mother's recipe. I thought it might be nice to have something normal, before everything gets harder." His face softened. "How did you know about this?" "I called your father's old housekeeper, asked her what your family used to eat." "Diane, you didn't have to." "I wanted to." They ate together. Ruth joined them, kept the conversation light, asked about work, about the company, about the new product launch, about anything except the obvious. Brett relaxed, laughed at Ruth's stories about Diane as a child, talked about his own childhood, about his mother, about Sunday dinners that felt like a lifetime ago. For a moment, Diane could almost see the man she had married, the one who had proposed on a beach in Mexico, who had cried at their wedding, who had held her through every failed pregnancy test and promised it would be okay. That man was still in there somewhere, buried under the money and the mistress and the lies. But he was too far gone to save. After dinner, Diane brought out the documents, set them on the table like they were nothing important. Just another task to check off the list. Preston sent these over, she said casually. Estate planning stuff. He says we need to update everything now that we're having the babies. Brett barely glanced at them. What are they? Boring legal stuff, trust for the children, making sure they're protected if anything happens to either of us. She kept her voice light, unconcerned. Like this was routine, like every wealthy couple did this. Makes sense, Brett said. Where do I sign? Diane showed him, page after page. He signed without reading, barely paying attention, thinking about something else. Someone else? His phone buzzed. He glanced at it, smiled slightly, then caught himself, schooled his expression back to neutral. But Diane saw it, that little smile, that flicker of joy that wasn't for her. Work, she asked innocently. Yeah, always something. He finished signing, pushed the papers back to her, kissed her forehead, the same mechanical kiss he always gave her now. Muscle memory, not affection. I have some calls to make, he said. I'll be in the study. The moment he left, Ruth exhaled. He didn't read any of it. He never does, Diane said. That's what executive summaries are for. He trusts other people to handle details. And now those details have locked him out of his own fortune. Not his fortune, our children's fortune. There's a difference, Diane gathered the documents, put them in her bag, would drop them at Preston's office tomorrow morning, for notarization, for filing, for making permanent. Phase 1 complete. But there was more to do. So much more. Diane stood at the window, looked out at the Manhattan skyline, at the city that had been her home for 15 years, at the life she had built, the life that was ending. Her reflection stared back at her, pale, thin, stomach swollen with 3 lives, the ghost of who she used to be. I'm becoming someone I don't recognize, she said quietly. Ruth came to stand beside her. You're becoming a mother. That changes everything. Does it justify this, the lying, the manipulation? You're not lying. You told him it was estate planning. It is, you're not manipulating. You're protecting. There's a difference. Is there? Ruth took her hand. When your father was dying, I did things I'm not proud of. I forged signatures. I lied to insurance companies. I broke laws because keeping you safe mattered more than my conscience. I never knew that. That's because I protected you, the way you're protecting them. Diane looked down at her swollen belly, felt 3 babies moving inside her, 3 lives depending on her choices. I hope they understand someday why I did this. They will, because you're going to tell them. In those videos you're making, you're going to explain everything. Over the next 2 weeks, Diane's pregnancy became harder. She was 24 weeks now. The babies were growing. Her body was straining. Her feet swelled so badly she couldn't wear shoes. Her back ached constantly. Her heart skipped beats at random times. Made her dizzy. Made her scared. Audrey ordered modified bed rest. Nothing strenuous. Lots of water. Monitor blood pressure 3 times a day. Ruth took over everything. Cooking, cleaning, managing Diane's medications, timing her rest periods. Being the mother and the nurse at the same time, Brett worked longer hours, came home later, sometimes didn't come home at all, crashing at the office. He would text, big project, deadline, love you. Diane knew where he really was, knew who he was with, didn't bother confronting him. What was the point? Instead, she focused on her videos. She started recording them at 26 weeks, when the babies were big enough to probably survive if something went wrong, when death felt close enough to touch. She set up her phone in the nursery, sat in the rocking chair Ruth had bought, and talked to 3 children who couldn't hear her yet. Hi, babies. I'm your mom. Today you're 6 months old. Well, 6 months in utero, which is different. But still, you're here. And I'm here, Mom. And we're going to meet soon. She paused, wiped her eyes, kept going. I'm making these videos because I might not be here for everything. For your first steps, your first words, your first day of school, and I need you to know who I was, who you came from. She told them about her life, about meeting their father, about falling in love, about wanting them so badly it hurt. She didn't mention the affair, didn't mention Sienna. Those were conversations for later, for when they were old enough to understand. She made videos for every milestone. First birthdays, fifth birthdays, 10th, graduation, wedding days. I hope you find someone who loves you the way you deserve to be loved, she said in the wedding video. Someone who shows up, who stays, who chooses you every single day. Don't settle for less than that. You're worth more. Late at night, when she couldn't sleep, she would play the videos back. Watch herself talking to 3 babies who might never remember her, might only know her through these recordings. It was the saddest thing she had ever done. And the most important, the contractions started at 2 in the morning. Diane felt the first one in her sleep. A tightening. Pressure. Nothing too bad. She told herself it was nothing. Braxton Hicks. False labor. Her body practicing. The second contraction came 5 minutes later. Harder. Sharper. Real. She pressed the call button. The nurse appeared within seconds. It's happening, Diane said. The room exploded into controlled chaos. Nurses, doctors, equipment rolling in, lights too bright, voices too loud. Audrey appeared in scrubs. Dr. Porter, the neonatal specialist, right behind her. 27 weeks exactly, Audrey said. Not ideal, but viable. We can do this. They wheeled Diane to the operating room. Emergency C-section. 3 babies coming at once. Her heart already struggling. Blood pressure too high. Too much stress. Too much everything. Ruth squeezed her hand. You've got this. Baby girl, you're stronger than you know. I'm scared. Good. That means you're human. But you're also a Fletcher woman, and we don't quit. They gave Diane the epidural, numbed her from the chest down, put up the blue drape so she could not see, but she could hear every sound, every word. Heart rate dropping, blood pressure spiking. We need to move faster. Then the most beautiful sound she had ever heard, a baby crying, thin, reedy, furious at being born too soon. Baby A, female, 2 pounds, 3 ounces. Lily, her Lily, here, alive, crying. Baby B, male, 2 pounds even, Jackson, her Jackson, smaller, quieter, but breathing. Baby C, female, 2 pounds, 4 ounces. Harper, her Harper, the biggest, the fighter. 3 babies, 3 perfect, impossible miracles. Diane tried to see them, but the drape blocked everything. She heard them being whisked away to the NICU, to incubators, to machines that would breathe for them until they learned how. Diane, Audrey's voice was sharp. Stay with me. I'm here. Your heart, it's in arrhythmia. We need to. The world went sideways, then black. Diane woke up hours later in the ICU. Tubes everywhere, machines beeping. Ruth asleep in the chair beside her bed. Mom, Diane croaked. Ruth jolted awake. Oh, thank God, you scared us. You coded twice on the table. The babies. They're alive. In the NICU, fighting. But alive. I want to see them. Not yet. You're too weak. Another day or 2, then we'll get you down there. Brett appeared that afternoon, looking genuinely shaken, pale, scared. Diane, Jesus, they said you died. I got better. He laughed. It came out choked. Don't joke. I was serious. He held her hand, cried, promised to be better, to be present, to be the husband she needed. She wanted to believe him. Part of her did believe him. The part that remembered who he used to be, before the money, before the mistress, before everything went wrong. I saw them, he said. The babies, they're so small, so fragile, but they're here. We're parents. Diane, we did it. You should go be with them, she said. They need their father. He nodded, kissed her forehead, left. Ruth watched him go. He's scared. Fear makes people behave, but it doesn't make them change. I know. 3 days later, they moved Diane to a regular room, set up a wheelchair, took her down to the NICU. The unit was quiet, dimly lit, full of tiny plastic boxes with tinier humans inside. Lily was in isolate 3, tubes in her nose, wires taped to her chest, eyes closed, but breathing on her own, strong, fighting. Jackson was in isolate 5, still on a ventilator, his little chest rising and falling with mechanical precision, smaller than his sister's, struggling more, but alive. Harper was in isolate 7, doing best of all, already off the ventilator, just oxygen now, already gaining weight, the fighter Margaret had predicted she would be. Diane reached through the porthole, touched Lily's tiny hand. It was smaller than her thumb, softer than anything she had ever felt. Hi, baby girl, she whispered. I'm your mom. I'm here. I'm always going to be here. Lily's fingers wrapped around hers. The grip was weak, but it was there, real, proof of life. Diane broke down, sobbed, let all the fear and grief and love pour out. I'm sorry, Betrayal, she said. I'm sorry you had to come so early. I'm sorry I couldn't keep you safe longer. But you're here now, and we're going to fight, all of us, together. She moved to Jackson's isolette. He looked so fragile, so breakable, like he might stop breathing if she looked away. You're my brave boy, she told him. You're going to be okay. I know it's hard right now, but you're a Caldwell, and Caldwells don't quit. At Harper's isolette, she found her littlest fighter awake, eyes open, looking around, seeing the world for the first time. Hello, my love. You're the strong one, aren't you? Taking care of your brother and sister? That's okay, but don't forget to rest. Let the nurses help. Let me help. She spent 3 hours there, moving between isolates, talking to each baby, telling them stories, singing lullabies, being their mother in the only way she could. The NICU became her world, but her body was failing faster than expected. Marshall Caldwell arrived without warning. Diane was in the NICU when the nurses told her she had a visitor. Important visitor. Waiting in the family lounge. She found Marshall standing by the window, 70 years old, silver hair, sharp eyes, looking every inch the tech titan he had been for 4 decades. Hello, Diane. Marshall, I didn't know you were coming. I came as soon as I heard about the babies and about your condition. He turned from the window. His expression was serious, sad. May I see them, my grandchildren? Diane took him to the NICU, showed him Lily, Jackson, Harper, watched as his face softened, as this hard man who had built empires melted at the sight of 3 tiny babies. They're beautiful, he said quietly. They look like you. They sat in the family lounge afterward. Marshall ordered real coffee from outside, not the hospital sludge. Diane, I need to tell you something, and you're not going to like it. If it's about Brett and Sienna, I already know. Marshall's eyebrows rose. You know. For 2 months now, Holly hired an investigator, and you haven't thrown him out. I'm dying, Marshall. I don't have time for divorce proceedings. I need to focus on keeping myself alive long enough for the babies to survive. Marshall nodded slowly. That's smart. Pragmatic. Your father would be proud. I doubt that. He would, Yun, because you're not letting emotion cloud your judgment. You're thinking strategically. Marshall set down his coffee, leaned forward. I've known about the affair for 6 months. I hired my own investigator, and I found things that worry me. What things? Sienna Vale is not who she claims to be. Her resume is fabricated. Her references are fake. Her entire background is manufactured. Diane felt cold. What do you mean? I mean she's done this before. 3 times. 3 different wealthy men, 2 dead, 1 divorced. Each time she positioned herself as the grieving girlfriend or the wronged mistress. Each time she walked away with money. She's a professional. She's a predator. She finds vulnerable, wealthy men, seduces them, waits for the right moment, then collects. Does Brett know? I tried to tell him. Twice. He refused to listen. Said I was being controlling. Said I didn't understand. Said I was trying to ruin his happiness. Marshall's voice was bitter, angry. My son has become someone I don't recognize. Someone who abandons his dying wife for a con artist. Someone who prioritizes his own comfort over his family's survival. He's always been weak, Diane said quietly. I just didn't want to see it. He wasn't always. When he was young, he had principles, drive, integrity, but the money changed him. Success changed him. Or maybe it just revealed who he always was. They sat in silence for a moment. I'm changing my will, Marshall said. Brett is not inheriting the family estate. It's going to your children instead. All of it. The properties, the investment portfolio, everything. Marshall, you don't have to. Yes, I do. Because those babies deserve better than what their father is giving them. And you deserve support. Real support. Not empty promises. He pulled out a folder. Legal documents already prepared. My attorneys have drawn up everything. The estate will be held in trust for Lily, Jackson, and Harper. You're the trustee while you're alive. Ruth takes over after you. Brett has no access, no control, no say. Diane looked at the papers, at this man who barely knew her, who was giving her children his entire legacy. Why are you doing this? Because family is supposed to protect family. And right now, you and those babies are the only family worth protecting. The trial dominated the news for weeks. After Diane's death, after the will reading, after Brett finally understood what he had lost, Sienna made her move. She filed a palimony lawsuit, $50 million claim, common law marriage, promised future. Years of her life wasted. Preston Hall called Brett at 7 in the morning. We have a problem. What kind of problem? Your ex-mistress is suing you for $50 million. Claims you promised to marry her. Claims she gave up career opportunities to be with you. Claims she's entitled to compensation. Brett felt sick. Can she do that? She can try, Wahom, but she's going to lose, Buen. We have documentation of the timeline. Proof she was with you while Diane was dying. Evidence of her pattern with other men. She's not getting a penny. So why are you worried? Because lawsuits are public, messy, and right now, with everything happening, we don't need more drama. But drama came anyway. Sienna went to the press, gave interviews, painted herself as the victim. The other woman who had been promised everything and left with nothing. The girlfriend who had supported a grieving widower only to be discarded. She was good, convincing, had clearly done this before. Brett told me he loved me, she said on Good Morning America. Tears streaming, makeup perfect even while crying. He said once Diane was gone, we'd be together, we'd have a life, and I believed him. I gave up everything for him. The interviewer leaned forward sympathetically. What did you give up? My career, my independence. I was director of strategic initiatives at Caldwell Technologies. I had opportunities at other companies, but Brett said he needed me, that we were building a future together. She dabbed her eyes with a tissue. I watched him grieve. I supported him through the pregnancy complications, through Diane's death, and the moment she was gone, the moment he had what he wanted, he threw me away like garbage. The internet exploded, half sympathetic, half horrified, everyone with opinions. She knew he was married. She deserves nothing, but he made her promises. He led her on. Gold digger. Obvious gold digger. Why are we always blaming the woman? Grace watched the interview on her laptop, called Ruth immediately. She's rewriting history, making herself the victim. We need to stop this. How? Release the evidence. Everything. The timeline, the credit card statements, the photos. Show everyone exactly who she is. And risk dragging Diane's name through the mud, making her death about a scandal. Diane wouldn't care about her name. She'd care about protecting those babies from that woman. And this is how we do it. Ruth was quiet for a long moment. Then she called Preston. Gave authorization to release everything. Within 24 hours, the narrative shifted. Preston held his own press conference. Professional, surgical, devastating. Miss Vale has presented herself as a victim, but the evidence tells a different story. He displayed a timeline on a large screen behind him. The affair began 18 months ago, August 15th, while Mrs. Caldwell was undergoing her final IVF treatment. Click. Security footage from Brett's office building. Sienna and Brett leaving together late at night, her hand on his arm. November 20th, Mrs. Caldwell collapses at a charity gala, discovers she's pregnant with triplets, discovers her heart condition is terminal. Click. Hospital visitor logs. Sienna visited the hospital twice, not to see Diane, to see Brett. December through March, Mrs. Caldwell fights to keep her babies alive while her heart fails. During this time, Mr. Caldwell spent $47,000 on jewelry, luxury hotels, and vacation rentals. Click. Credit card statements. Highlighted charges. None of the jewelry went to Diane. April 5th, Mrs. Caldwell gives birth prematurely at 27 weeks. Her heart stops twice on the operating table. Preston's voice was cold, clinical. April 6th, the day after Mrs. Caldwell nearly died giving birth to triplets, Miss Vale texted Mr. Caldwell 14 times. The content of those messages, he displayed them on screen. Is she going to make it? How much longer? We've waited so long already. Just tell me when it's finally over. The press room went silent. May 3rd, Mrs. Caldwell dies. She was 35 years old. She left behind 3 premature infants fighting for their lives in the NICU. Preston's expression hardened. May 4th, less than 24 hours after Mrs. Caldwell's death, Miss Vale called Mr. Caldwell 17 times. When he didn't answer, she went to his apartment. Security footage shows her trying multiple times to gain entry. Click. Footage of Sienna at Brett's building, increasingly agitated, demanding to be let up. May 7th, Mrs. Caldwell's funeral. Miss Vale attended. She sat in the back. She wore designer black, and she checked her phone 43 times during the service. Murmurs rippled through the press corps. Now, let's discuss Miss Vale's background. Preston pulled up a new slide, a photo of a younger Sienna, different name underneath. Her real name is Sienna Voss, changed legally 6 years ago. Before that, she was involved with 3 other wealthy men, Richard Grayson, Thomas Hartley, David Morehouse. Click. Photos of all 3 men. Grayson died of a supposed heart attack at 52. Miss Voss was the beneficiary on his life insurance policy. $500,000. Click. Hartley drowned. Miss Voss was the only witness. She inherited his beach house and boat. $300,000. Click. Morehouse survived, but he lost $12 million in a divorce settlement to Miss Voss, who claimed common law marriage. Preston looked directly at the cameras. This is not a woman who was led on. This is a woman with a pattern, a predator who targets vulnerable, wealthy men, who positions herself, who waits, and who collects. The internet turned on her. Fast, brutal, unforgiving. Sienna tried to fight back, did more interviews, claimed the evidence was fabricated, that Marshall Caldwell was manipulating everything to protect his son, but then the Seattle police went public. Detective Morrison held a press conference at noon. We have arrested Sienna Voss, also known as Sienna Vale, on charges of fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy. We are also reopening investigations into the deaths of Richard Grayson and Thomas Hartley. He pulled up photos of both men. Miss Voss has been running a sophisticated con operation for at least 5 years. She targets wealthy men, particularly those going through difficult times. She ingratiates herself, makes herself indispensable, then positions herself to inherit or collect when circumstances change. A reporter shouted a question. Is Nathaniel Caldwell considered a victim? Mr. Caldwell cooperated fully with our investigation. He provided evidence, testimony. He was a target, yes, but he also made choices that enabled Miss Voss's behavior. The perp walk was everywhere within hours. Sienna in handcuffs, orange jumpsuit, hair disheveled, makeup gone, the carefully constructed mask completely shattered. Photographers everywhere, cameras flashing, questions shouted. She looked directly at the nearest camera. She can't keep winning, Sienna screamed. She's dead. She's dead and she's still beating me. The officer beside her spoke calmly. Keep moving, Miss Voss. This isn't fair. I played the game right. I did everything right. And you're going to prison. For a long time. The trial took 3 months. The prosecution built an airtight case. Financial records showing the pattern across multiple victims. Testimonies from former colleagues who described her calculated behavior. Expert witnesses on predatory relationship patterns. Digital forensics recovering deleted text messages. And the Grayson autopsy. They had exhumed the body, found elevated levels of digitalis, not enough to be obvious, but enough to trigger a heart attack in a man with a pre-existing condition. The jury deliberated for 4 hours, guilty on all counts. The judge showed no mercy. Miss Voss, you have demonstrated a clear pattern of predatory behavior. You have exploited vulnerable individuals. You have shown no remorse. You are a danger to society. 18 years in federal prison, no parole eligibility for 12. As they led her away in chains, Sienna looked at Brett one last time. He sat in the gallery, holding Jackson, Ruth beside him with Lily, Holly with Harper. No more tears, no more victim act, just cold, pure hatred. You were supposed to be easy, she said, her voice flat, dead. A lonely rich man with a dying wife. Simple. But she ruined everything, even dead. She beat me. She beat both of us. Brett looked at her, really looked at her, saw what Diane had seen all along. She beat both of us, Brett replied quietly. The difference is, I'm grateful for it. The bailiff pulled Sienna away. Her screams echoed down the courthouse hallway, cursing, threatening, completely unraveling. Brett turned to Ruth. Can we go home now? The babies need their nap. Ruth smiled, squeezed his shoulder. Yes, let's go home. 1 year after Diane Fletcher died, her children celebrated their first birthday. Ruth hosted at the Manhattan apartment, the home that was now theirs. 3 one-year-olds ruled everything with sticky hands and loud voices. The living room was decorated with yellow balloons, yellow streamers, yellow everything. Because Diane had wanted to be surprised by their genders. Because yellow meant sunshine. Hope. New beginnings. Holly arrived first with her 2 kids. They had been asking about the babies for weeks. She brought presents wrapped in shiny paper. Brought energy and chaos and love. Audrey came with her husband. Brought medical humor about how miraculous it was that 3 preemies were now thriving 1-year-olds. How Diane would be so proud. Marshall flew in from Seattle. Brought outrageously expensive gifts that 1-year-olds could not appreciate yet, but would someday, when they were old enough to understand that their grandfather had chosen them over his own son. Preston brought legal updates. The trust was performing beautifully. The children would never want for anything. Diane's planning had been perfect. And Brett arrived at noon, carrying 3 small wrapped boxes. Nervous, hopeful, still earning his place, but earning it steadily. Ruth met him at the door, studied his face. You look better. I feel better. Therapy helps. Being honest helps. Showing up helps. Good. The babies have been asking for you. They can't talk yet. No, but they look for you, Lily especially. She knows your voice now. His eyes got wet. Diane would be happy about that. Diane would be happy about a lot of things. Come on, everyone's waiting. The party was loud, chaotic, perfect. 3 babies trying to figure out cake, getting more on their faces than in their mouths. Laughing, smearing frosting everywhere. Lily smashed her cake methodically, piece by piece, studied each handful before eating it. Curious, thoughtful. Just like Diane had been, Jackson needed help, was overwhelmed by the texture, the messiness. But with Brett's encouragement, he tried, smiled, got frosting in his hair. Harper dove in face first. No hesitation. Pure joy. Made everyone laugh. Made everyone remember that happiness was still possible. Even after tragedy. After cake. After presents. After the chaos settled. Ruth gathered everyone in the living room. Diane made videos, she said, for every milestone. And today, their first birthday, she made one for today. She pulled out her laptop, queued up the video, hit play. Diane's face filled the screen. Thin, pale, but smiling. Really smiling. Hello, my darlings. Today you are 1 year old, and I'm missing your party. But I was there for the party that mattered most, your arrival. Let me tell you about the day you were born. She told the story. The emergency C-section, coding twice, fighting to survive long enough to see them take their first breaths, hearing 3 cries and knowing they were alive. You were so small, so fragile. Jackson, you were 2 pounds exactly, the smallest, but you fought so hard. Lily, you were 2 pounds, 3 ounces, serious from the beginning, studying everything with wise eyes. And Harper, you were 2 pounds, 4 ounces, the biggest, the loudest. You came out screaming and you never stopped. I love that about you. Everyone in the room was crying, even Marshall, even Preston, even Brett, who had heard stories but never Diane's voice telling them. I want you to know something. Diane continued. I fought for you. I fought to stay pregnant, to give you more time. I fought through the C-section, through my heart stopping, through everything, because you were worth fighting for. You are worth fighting for. Always. She looked at the camera, at 3 children who were watching 1 year later, who would watch this video many times over the years, who would hear their mother's voice even though they would never remember it from real life. You're surrounded by people who love you. Your grandmother Ruth, your Auntie Holly, your grandfather Marshall, Dr. Audrey who helped bring you here, and your father. She paused. Your father loves you. He's made mistakes, big ones, but he's trying, and that's what matters. Not perfection, but effort. Not never falling down, but getting back up. Give him that chance. Give him grace. Let him show you who he can be. She smiled, that beautiful smile that Harper had inherited. I love you more than words can say, more than videos can capture. You are my heart, my legacy, my forever. Happy first birthday, my darlings. Make it a good one. The video ended. No one spoke for a long moment. The babies babbled, oblivious to the tears, to the grief, to the love pouring out of every adult in the room. She was remarkable, Audrey said finally. Absolutely remarkable. Marshall agreed. Those children will never want for anything. Not just money, but love, support, people who remember their mother and keep her alive for them. Brett stood, walked to the window, looked out at the park where someday 3 children would play, would grow, would become people. Ruth joined him. You okay? I don't deserve this, any of it. The chance to know them, to be part of their lives after what I did. No, you don't deserve it. But Diane gave it to you anyway. That's grace. Brett, that's love. The question is not whether you deserve it. The question is what you're going to do with it. I'm going to be better. Every day. I'm going to show up, be present, be the father she believed I could be. Then that's enough. That's all any of us can do. Be better than we were yesterday. They stood together, watched 3 babies playing with their new toys, watched Holly helping Lily stack blocks, watched Audrey holding Jackson, watched Marshall making Harper laugh. She won, Brett said quietly. Diane won. She protected them, made sure they'd be okay, made sure they'd be loved, even after she was gone. That's what mothers do, Ruth said. We make sure someone remembers to cut the crusts off the sandwiches long after we're gone. Diane just did it on a bigger scale. As the afternoon faded into evening, as guests started leaving, as 3 tired babies were put down for naps, Ruth stood in the nursery, the same nursery where Diane had recorded her videos, the same rocking chair, the same 3 cribs. She thought about her daughter, about the girl who had been scared of thunderstorms but loved rain, who had ugly cried at Disney movies, who had wanted children so badly she traded her life for theirs. You did good, baby girl, Ruth whispered into the darkness. They're safe. They're loved. They're going to be okay. You made sure of it. A sound from one of the cribs. Harper stirring, not crying, gulping, just making noise. Ruth lifted her out, held her close, felt the warm weight of her granddaughter, felt Diane in every feature, every expression. Your mama loved you so much, Ruth said softly. She fought like hell to Bristol's care plan Grenamir. And now it's my job to make sure you know that. To make sure all three of you know that. Harper made a sound. Contentment, trust, love. Ruth carried her to the window, looked out at the night sky, at stars scattered across darkness, at the moon hanging full and bright. See that moon, Harper? Your mama used to sing to the moon when she was pregnant with you. Said she hoped you'd look up at it someday. Know she'd looked at the same moon, that you were connected through light and love, even across the distance. Harper reached toward the window, toward the light. That's right, reach for it. Your mama would want that, would want you to reach, to dream, to fight, to love, to live fully and fearlessly and without apology. Ruth sang softly, the lullaby Diane had loved, the one about stars and dreams and love that never ends. By the second verse, Harper was asleep, peaceful, safe, exactly as Diane had planned. Ruth put her back in her crib. Checked on Lily and Jackson, both sleeping, both growing, both living the life their mother had sacrificed everything to give them. Diane Fletcher died at 35, Ruth said softly, standing between three cribs, looking at three miracles. But her love was immortal. It lives here, in them, in all of us who carry her forward, in every choice we make to protect them, to guide them, to love them the way she would have. She turned off the light, left the door cracked, went to her own room where photos of Diane covered the dresser. Diane as a baby, as a child, as a teenager, as a bride, as a pregnant woman glowing with hope, as a mother holding three babies for the first and only time. Sleep well, baby girl, Ruth said to the photos, to the ghost of her daughter, to the woman who taught her that the strongest thing you can do is protect those you love, even when it costs everything. Your babies are safe, your legacy is secure, and tomorrow we'll wake up and do it all again, because that's what family does. We keep going, we keep loving, we keep your memory alive. She climbed into bed, closed her eyes, listened to the baby monitor, to three babies breathing in sync, to the sound of life continuing, of hope persisting, of love winning. Diane Fletcher died, but she also lived, in three heartbeats, in videos waiting to be watched, in a trust that would support them, in people who remembered, who loved, who would make sure her sacrifice mattered. That was victory, not revenge, not bitterness, but protection, love, legacy. Diane Fletcher died, but her fight was won, and three babies slept peacefully, surrounded by people who would make sure they knew, make sure they understood. Their mother had fought like hell to give them life, had built a fortress to protect them, had left breadcrumbs of love for them to follow. And when they were old enough to understand, old enough to ask questions, old enough to watch those videos and see their mother's face, they would know, beyond doubt, beyond question, they were loved, they were wanted, they were worth everything. Diane Fletcher made sure of it, even from beyond the grave, especially from beyond the grave. Because that is what mothers do. They protect, they plan, they fight, they love, and they win. Not through revenge, but through legacy, through the lives they shape, through the love they leave behind. Diane Fletcher died at 35, but her love was immortal.